The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. I barely noticed the splash of bubbly on my new dress as I stared at Brad, my husband of 1 month, in disbelief. "What did you just say?" I managed to choke out, praying I'd misheard him. Brad's blue eyes, once so captivating, now seemed cold and distant. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair and repeated the words that had just shattered my world. "I'm in love with someone else. Aubrey, I want a divorce." The elegant anniversary dinner I'd spent hours preparing lay forgotten on the table behind us. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls of our penthouse apartment. It should have been romantic. Instead, it felt like a cruel joke. "Who is she?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Brad hesitated, then squared his shoulders. "Isabel Hartley." The name hit me like a physical blow. Isabel Hartley, the socialite whose face graced every society page and charity gala in the city. I'd always known Brad had a wandering eye, but this... "How long?" I whispered. 6 months, Brad admitted. "I'm sorry, Aubrey, I never meant for this to happen." A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. "Never meant for it to happen? We've been married for 4 weeks, Brad. Did you even mean those vows?" He had the decency to look ashamed. "I thought I could make it work with us. I really did try." "Try?" I spat. "By sleeping with another woman behind my back?" Brad's expression hardened. "Look, I know this is a shock, but let's be adults about this. We can handle the divorce quietly. No need for a big scene." I gaped at him, fury rising to replace the initial shock. "A big scene? You drop this bomb on our anniversary and expect me to just roll over?" "Come on, Aubrey," Brad said, his tone patronizing. "You had to know deep down that this wasn't working. We've been drifting apart for years." "Because you've been cheating on me," I shouted, finally losing my composure. "God, how many times have I forgiven you? And now this." Brad's phone chimed. He glanced at it, then back at me. "I have to go. We can discuss the details later when you've calmed down." As he moved towards the door, something inside me snapped. I grabbed the nearest object, a crystal vase, another wedding gift, and hurled it at the wall. It exploded in a shower of glass, making Brad jump. "You want a divorce?" I snarled. "Fine. But don't think for a second I'm going to make this easy for you. I've stood by you for 10 years, Brad. I've forgiven every indiscretion, supported your career, been the perfect wife. No more." Brad's eyes widened slightly. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "What are you saying?" I straightened my spine, meeting his gaze with steel in my own. "I'm saying that if you want out of this marriage, it's going to cost you. Big time. Now, Aubrey, let's not be hasty." "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out before I do something we'll both regret." Brad hesitated for a moment, then nodded curtly. As the door closed behind him, I sank to the floor, heedless of the broken glass. Tears threatened, but I blinked them back furiously. No more crying over Brad Thompson. No more being the understanding, forgiving wife. As I sat there, surrounded by the wreckage of my marriage, a new resolve began to form. Brad wanted a divorce? Fine. But he was about to learn that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. It was time to call a lawyer. I stared at the divorce papers spread across my kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of wine within easy reach. It had been 3 days since Brad's bombshell, and the shock was finally wearing off, replaced by a simmering anger that threatened to boil over at any moment. My phone buzzed. Another message from my best friend Lydia. "How are you holding up, sweetie? Need me to come over?" I sighed, typing out a quick reply. "I'm fine. Just going over everything with the lawyer tomorrow. Talk soon." The truth was, I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want their pity or their well-meaning advice. What I wanted was justice. As I poured another glass of wine, memories of the past decade flooded back. The first time I caught Brad cheating, just 2 years into our relationship. His tearful apologies, promises to change, and like a fool, I believed him. Then there was the work trip to Vegas that turned out to be a weekend with his secretary. The flirtatious texts I found on his phone from countless women. Each time I forgave him. Each time I thought things would be different. "Never again," I muttered, taking a long swig of wine. The doorbell rang, startling me out of my bitter reverie. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I considered ignoring it, but something compelled me to answer. I wish I hadn't. Brad stood in the hallway, looking annoyingly handsome in an expensive suit. "Aubrey," he said, his voice soft. "Can we talk?" Every instinct screamed at me to slam the door in his face. Instead, I stepped aside, letting him in. "Nice suit," I said coldly. "Isabel's taste, I assume?" Brad winced. "Look, I know you're angry." "Angry doesn't begin to cover it," I snapped. "What do you want, Brad?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I once found endearing. Now it just irritated me. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the alimony." I raised an eyebrow. "And?" "I'm willing to be generous," he said, pulling out a folded document. "I had my lawyer draw this up. It's a fair settlement, Aubrey. More than fair, actually." I snatched the paper from his hand, scanning the numbers. My eyes widened. It was indeed generous, far more than I'd expected. "Why?" I demanded, suspicion creeping in. "What's the catch?" Brad sighed. "No catch. I want to make this right, or as right as it can be, given the circumstances." For a moment, I almost believed him, almost fell for the sincere look in his eyes, the regretful tone in his voice. But then I remembered all the times I'd heard this before. "Make it right?" I laughed bitterly. "You can't make this right, Brad. You've humiliated me, betrayed me, and for what? Some socialite who'll probably toss you aside the moment someone richer comes along?" Brad's expression hardened. "That's not fair. Isabel and I—" "I don't want to hear it." I cut him off. "You know what? Keep your generous offer. I'll see you in court." I crumpled up the settlement offer and threw it at his chest. Brad's eyes widened in surprise. "Aubrey, don't be foolish," he warned. "This is more than you'd get in any court settlement. Think about your future." His condescending tone was the final straw. "My future?" I hissed. "My future was supposed to be with you, Brad. But you threw that away, so now I'm going to build a new future. One where I don't have to depend on your generosity or anyone else's." I yanked open the door. "Get out, and tell your lawyer to prepare for war." As the door slammed behind him, I leaned against it, heart pounding. Part of me screamed that I was making a mistake, that I should take the money and run. But a stronger part, a part I'd buried for far too long, whispered something else. It whispered of justice, of standing up for myself at last, of making Brad pay for every lie, every betrayal. I walked back to the kitchen, bypassing the wine glass for the bottle itself. Tomorrow, I'd call my lawyer. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. And this time, I wasn't backing down. I stood in the courthouse hallway, my heart pounding as I waited for my lawyer to emerge from the judge's chambers. The divorce proceedings had been a whirlwind, moving faster than I'd ever imagined possible. Brad's eagerness to settle had initially made me suspicious, but now I was beginning to understand why. The door opened and my lawyer Sarah strode out with a satisfied smile. "It's done, Aubrey. The judge approved the settlement." I blinked, stunned. "Just like that? What about the fight I was preparing for?" Sarah shrugged. "Sometimes we get lucky. Brad's lawyer pushed for a quick resolution, and the terms are more than fair. You're getting a very generous alimony package." As if summoned by his name, Brad appeared at the end of the hallway, Isabel clinging to his arm like an expensive accessory. My stomach churned at the sight of them together. "Congratulations, Aubrey," Brad said, his tone maddeningly cordial. "I hope this settlement helps you start fresh." I wanted to slap the smug look off his face. Instead, I forced a smile. "Oh, it will. Thank you for your generosity." Isabel's eyes narrowed. "Brad, darling, we'll be late for the charity gala. We should go." As they turned to leave, I couldn't resist one parting shot. "Enjoy the high life, Brad. I hope it's worth it." He paused, looking back at me with an unreadable expression. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But then Isabel tugged on his arm, and they were gone. I let out a shaky breath. "It's really over, isn't it?" Sarah squeezed my shoulder. "It is. And you came out on top, Aubrey. The alimony alone will set you up comfortably for years." But as we left the courthouse, a nagging doubt gnawed at me. Why had Brad given in so easily? What was he hiding? Weeks passed, and I tried to settle into my new life as a single woman. The alimony checks arrived like clockwork, each one a reminder of the life I'd left behind. I should have felt victorious, relieved. Instead, I felt empty. One rainy afternoon, as I scrolled mindlessly through social media, a headline caught my eye. "Tech mogul Brad Thompson and socialite wife make splash at Hampton's gala." The photo showed Brad and Isabel dressed to the nines, champagne flutes in hand. They looked sickeningly happy, surrounded by the glitterati of New York's elite. Anger bubbled up inside me. While I sat alone in my apartment, Brad was living it up with his new wife, spending the money he'd built his company with during our marriage. I was about to close the app when another headline made me freeze. Thompson Tech stock soars after surprise merger announcement. My hands shaking, I clicked the link. Brad's company, the one he'd started with seed money from my family, had just merged with a major Silicon Valley firm. The deal was worth billions. Suddenly, Brad's eagerness to settle, his generous alimony, it all made sense. He'd known this merger was coming. He'd rushed the divorce through before the news broke, before the true value of his assets could be calculated. I'd been played. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. I felt sick, betrayed all over again. Not just by Brad, but by the system that was supposed to protect me, to ensure a fair division of our marital assets. As I sat there surrounded by the trappings of my old life, a cold determination settled over me. Brad thought he'd won, that he'd outsmarted me one last time. But he'd underestimated me, again. I picked up my phone, my fingers flying over the keys as I composed an email to Sarah. It was time to reopen the case. Time to show Brad and the world that Aubrey Thompson wasn't going down without a fight. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice. And I was going to get mine, no matter what it took. I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen, willing the words to come. The website for my fledgling interior design business sat half-finished, a digital representation of my stalled life. It had been 3 months since the divorce, and I was struggling to find my footing. The alimony checks from Brad sat untouched in my bank account. Using that money felt like admitting defeat, like letting him win all over again. But my savings were dwindling, and the rent on this apartment, our old apartment, was due soon. A knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Lydia, arms laden with takeout bags. "Intervention time," she announced, breezing past me into the kitchen. "You've been ghosting everyone for weeks. Enough is enough." I sighed, following her. "I'm fine, Lydia, just busy with the new business." She fixed me with a skeptical look. "Uh-huh. And how's that going?" I gestured helplessly at my laptop. "It's a work in progress." Lydia's expression softened. "Sweetie, you can't keep punishing yourself. What happened with Brad wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it?" I countered, the bitterness I'd been suppressing bubbling to the surface. I was the one who kept forgiving him, who believed his lies. And now look at me, hiding in this apartment while he's out there living his best life with Isabel. Lydia grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to meet her gaze. "Listen to me, Aubrey. You are not the villain in this story. You're the hero. It's time you started acting like it." Her words hit me like a splash of cold water. She was right. I'd been wallowing in self-pity, letting Brad's betrayal define me. It was time to take control of my narrative. With newfound determination, I turned back to my laptop. "Help me finish this website," I said to Lydia. "It's time to launch this business for real." We worked through the night, fueled by takeout and determination. By dawn, Aubrey's Interiors was live, my portfolio of past projects proudly displayed for the world to see. As the sun rose, my phone pinged with a notification, my first client inquiry, then another and another. Lydia squealed, hugging me tight. "See? You've got this." For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I could do this after all. But life, as I was learning, had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. A week later, as I was preparing for my first official client meeting, my phone rang. It was Sarah, my lawyer. "Aubrey, we have a problem," she said, her voice tense. "Brad's lawyers are contesting the divorce settlement. They're claiming you knew about the merger before signing and are accusing you of fraud." The room spun around me. "What? That's ridiculous. I had no idea." "I know," Sarah cut in, "but they're pushing hard. If they win, you could lose everything. The alimony, the apartment, all of it." I sank onto the couch, my mind reeling. Just when I thought I was moving forward, Brad found a way to drag me back into his web of lies. "What do we do?" I whispered. Sarah's voice was grim. "We fight. But Aubrey, I need to know. Is there anything at all that could support their claims? Any conversations with Brad about the company before the divorce?" I racked my brain, thinking back to those tumultuous weeks. Then, with a jolt, I remembered, the night Brad came over with the settlement offer. He'd mentioned something about his company, about the future. I'd been too angry to pay attention at the time, but now, There might be, I admitted, my stomach churning. But Sarah, I swear I didn't know about the merger. I believe you, she said, but a good lawyer could twist this. We need to be prepared for a tough battle. As I hung up the phone, I stared at my newly launched website. The dream I'd just begun to build was already under threat. In that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't let Brad destroy me again. If he wanted a fight, he'd get one. But this time, I'd be ready. I picked up my phone, dialing Lydia's number. I need your help, I said when she answered. It's time to dig up every bit of dirt we can find on Brad Thompson. No more playing nice. The game had changed, and I was determined to win. I never thought I'd find myself skulking outside a high-end restaurant, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Through the window, I could see Brad and Isabel laughing with a group of well-heeled socialites. The sight made my blood boil. Are you sure about this? Lydia whispered beside me. I nodded grimly. We need dirt on Brad, and his new crowd is our best bet. We'd spent weeks digging into Brad's life, looking for anything to counter his fraud accusations. So far, we'd come up empty. But tonight, Brad was dining with Isabel's father, a notoriously shady businessman. If there was dirt to be found, it would be here. As the group exited the restaurant, Lydia and I ducked behind a parked car. Brad's voice carried in the night air. Don't worry, Richard, he was saying to Isabel's father. The SEC won't find anything. I've made sure of it. My heart raced. SEC? What had Brad gotten himself into? We trailed them to a nearby bar, slipping inside and finding a secluded booth. Brad and his group were at the bar, drinks flowing freely. As the night wore on, their voices grew louder, less guarded. Another round, Brad called, his words slightly slurred, to outsmarting the government and my ex-wife. Laughter erupted from the group. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to march over and confront him. Easy, Lydia murmured, placing a hand on my arm. We're here for information, remember? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. That's when I heard it. Brad, bragging about cooking the books for his recent merger. It was easy, he boasted. Those idiots at the SEC don't have a clue. And Aubrey? She signed away her rights without even realizing what she was giving up. The words hit me like a physical blow. Brad hadn't just cheated on me, he'd committed fraud and used our divorce to cover his tracks. Suddenly, Isabel's shrill voice cut through the din. Brad, darling, isn't that your ex-wife? I froze, realizing too late that in my shock I'd stood up from our booth. Brad's eyes met mine across the room, widening in recognition and then narrowing in anger. Time to go, Lydia hissed, grabbing my arm. We bolted for the exit, but Brad was faster. He caught up to us on the sidewalk, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. What the hell are you doing here, Aubrey? He demanded. I straightened my spine, meeting his gaze. Just having a drink, Brad. Is that a crime? Don't play dumb, he snarled. You were spying on me. What did you hear? Enough, I shot back. Enough to know that you're not just a cheater, but a criminal, too. Brad's face paled. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he leaned in close, his breath hot on my face. Listen carefully, he hissed. You breathe a word of what you heard tonight to anyone, and I'll make sure you lose everything. The alimony, your precious little business, all of it. Do you understand me? I should have been terrified. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. In that moment, I saw Brad for what he truly was. A bully, a coward, and a fraud. No, Brad, I said quietly. You listen. I'm not the same woman you married. I'm not afraid of you anymore. So go ahead, try to take everything from me. But remember this. I know your secrets now, and I'm not afraid to use them. I turned on my heel, leaving Brad sputtering on the sidewalk. As Lydia and I hurried away, my mind raced. I had the information I needed now, but using it came with enormous risk. If I exposed Brad's fraud, I could lose everything in the ensuing legal battle. But if I stayed silent, could I live with myself? As we reached my apartment, I made my decision. I turned to Lydia, my voice steady. Call Sarah, I said. It's time to fight fire with fire. The battle lines were drawn, and this time I was ready for war. I stared at the television in disbelief, my coffee slipping from my fingers and shattering on the floor. Brad's face filled the screen, his usual confident smirk replaced by a look of panic. Breaking news, the anchor announced. Tech mogul Brad Thompson's company, Thompson Tech, is under investigation by the SEC for alleged fraud and insider trading. My phone erupted with notifications. Texts from Lydia, calls from Sarah, even messages from old mutual friends I hadn't spoken to in months. Everyone wanted to know, had I known? Was I involved? I ignored them all, my eyes glued to the screen as more details emerged. The merger that had made Brad millions was now unraveling, dragging down not just his company but several others connected to Isabel's family. A knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find Sarah, looking grim. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the apartment. "The SEC wants to question you about Brad's activities during your marriage." My stomach dropped. "But I didn't know anything." Sarah's expression was sympathetic but firm. "They don't know that, and given the timing of your divorce and the merger, they think I was in on it," I finished, feeling sick. As Sarah outlined our legal options, my mind raced. I thought of the night at the bar, of Brad's drunken boasts. I had evidence that could bury him, but using it meant admitting I'd been spying on him. It could make me look complicit. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Aubrey?" Isabel's voice, usually so haughty, now sounded desperate. "Please, you have to help us. He's not handling this well." I laughed bitterly. "And why should I care?" "Because," Isabel's voice broke, "he's threatening to implicate you. He says if he goes down, he's taking you with him." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I ended the call, turning to Sarah with wide eyes. "We have a problem." Hours later, I sat in a sleek conference room, facing a team of stern-faced SEC investigators. Sarah sat beside me, a reassuring presence as I recounted my marriage to Brad, the divorce, everything I knew about his business dealings. "Mrs. Thompson," one investigator leaned forward, "are you aware that your ex-husband claims you had full knowledge of the merger and its irregularities?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I am now, but it's not true. Brad kept me in the dark about his business dealings throughout our marriage." "Can you prove that?" I hesitated, then nodded. "I can, but I need assurances that I won't be implicated for how I obtained this information." The investigators exchanged glances. "Go on," I recounted the night at the bar, playing the audio recording I'd secretly made on my phone. Brad's drunken confessions filled the room, damning him with every word. As the recording ended, a heavy silence fell. The lead investigator nodded slowly. "This changes things. Mrs. Thompson, we'll need you to come in for a formal statement." I left the SEC offices feeling drained but oddly liberated. I'd taken a risk, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was taking control of my own story. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You'll regret this." I should have been scared. Instead, I felt a surge of determination. Brad had underestimated me for the last time. As I hailed a cab, my phone rang again. This time, it was my biggest client, calling to cancel our contract in light of the scandal. In the span of a day, I'd become toxic by association. I leaned back in the cab, closing my eyes. I'd done the right thing, but at what cost? My business, my reputation, my future, everything I'd worked so hard to rebuild was now hanging by a thread. But as the city lights blurred past the window, I made a silent vow. I'd survived Brad's betrayal once. I would survive this too. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it head-on. Little did I know, the real battle was just beginning. The pounding on my door jolted me awake. I glanced at the clock, 3:17 a.m. My heart raced as I approached the door, peering through the peephole. What I saw made my blood run cold. Brad stood there, disheveled and wild-eyed, a far cry from the polished executive I'd once known. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. "Aubrey, please," his voice cracked. "I know you're in there. I need your help." Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Brad stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and desperation. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, keeping my distance. Brad's eyes darted around the room. "It's all falling apart, Aubrey. The company, the merger, everything. Isabel left me. Her family's lawyers are circling like vultures." "And this concerns me how?" I crossed my arms, fighting to keep my voice steady. He ran a shaking hand through his hair. "I'm sorry for everything. I was a fool, Aubrey. I threw away the best thing in my life for what? A life that was all smoke and mirrors." I'd imagined this moment so many times, Brad broken, apologizing, but now that it was happening, I felt nothing but a cold, hard anger. "You're only sorry because you got caught," I said flatly. "If your schemes had worked out, you'd still be living it up with Isabel, wouldn't you?" Brad's face crumpled. "No, that's not true." I've realized. Save it, I cut him off. What do you want, Brad? Why are you really here? He took a deep breath. I need your help. The SEC, they're building a case against me. But if you testify that you knew about the merger, that you were involved... I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want me to perjure myself, to go down with you? Please, Aubrey, he begged, reaching for my hand. I jerked away. We were a team once. We could be again. I still love you. For a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved, the man I'd forgiven time and time again. But then I remembered the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the humiliation of discovering his affairs, the way he'd discarded me for a younger model. No, I said, my voice steel. We're not a team, Brad. We haven't been for a long time. And you don't love me. You love what I represent. A way out of the mess you've made. Brad's face hardened. You owe me, Aubrey, that alimony you've been living on. My money built your precious little business. I laughed bitterly. Your money? You mean the money you defrauded from investors? The money you used to buy your way into Isabel's world? Be careful, Brad growled, taking a step towards me. You don't want to make an enemy of me. Fear flashed through me, but I stood my ground. No, Brad, you don't want to make an enemy of me. I have the recording, remember? One call to the SEC and... Brad lunged at me, his eyes wild. I stumbled backwards, knocking over a lamp. The crash seemed to snap him out of it. He stared at his hands in horror. Oh God, Aubrey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Get out, I said, my voice shaking. Get out now, or I'm calling the police. Brad's shoulders slumped in defeat. As he shuffled towards the door, he turned back one last time. I really am sorry, Aubrey, for everything. The door closed behind him, and I sank to the floor, trembling. I'd stood my ground, but at what cost? Brad was desperate, unpredictable. What if he made good on his threats? My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. SEC wants to meet tomorrow. Urgent. I closed my eyes, exhaustion washing over me. In a few hours, I'd have to face the investigators again. I'd have to decide once and for all, protect myself or tell the whole truth and risk everything. As dawn broke over the city, I made my choice. Whatever came next, I was done living in Brad's shadow. It was time to write my own story, no matter the consequences. I stood in the courtroom, my heart pounding as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Months had passed since that night. Brad showed up at my door, desperate and unhinged. In that time, my world had been turned upside down. The SEC investigation had been brutal. Every aspect of my life with Brad had been scrutinized, every financial decision questioned. I'd lost clients, friends, and more than a few nights' sleep. But I'd stood my ground, telling the truth even when it hurt. Now, as I waited for the judge's decision, I caught Brad's eye across the courtroom. He looked haggard, a shell of the man who'd once commanded boardrooms. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. Then I remembered all the pain he'd caused, and my resolve hardened. In the matter of the United States versus Bradley Thompson, the judge began, her voice cutting through the tense silence. This court finds the defendant guilty on all counts of fraud and insider trading. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. I closed my eyes, a mix of relief and sadness washing over me. It was over. Finally, truly over. As the judge detailed Brad's sentence, years in prison, millions in fines, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I'd told the truth, consequences be damned, and justice had prevailed. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. I pushed through them, ignoring the cameras and microphones thrust in my face. Lydia was waiting by the curb, a supportive smile on her face. You did it, Aubrey, she said, pulling me into a hug. It's over. But it wasn't over. Not really. As we drove away from the courthouse, I knew the hardest part was just beginning. I had to rebuild. My life, my business, my trust in myself. Months passed. Slowly, painstakingly, I pieced my world back together. My interior design business, nearly destroyed by the scandal, began to recover. Clients who'd abandoned me started to return, drawn by my newfound reputation for integrity. One day, as I was finishing up a consultation with a new client, I noticed a man lingering by my office door. He was handsome, with kind eyes and a warm smile. Can I help you? I asked, curious. He stepped forward, extending his hand. I'm David. I hope this isn't too forward, but I've been following your story in the news. What you did, standing up to your ex-husband like that, it was incredibly brave. I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. Thank you. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do. David's smile widened. "I was wondering if you might like to grab coffee sometime? To talk about interior design, of course," he added with a wink. For a moment, I hesitated. The wounds from Brad's betrayal were still fresh. But as I looked into David's eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time: genuine admiration and respect. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. As David and I walked out of my office chatting easily, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me wasn't the same one who'd stood shell-shocked in her kitchen all those months ago, listening to her husband confess his affair. This woman was stronger, wiser, and unafraid to stand up for herself. She'd faced her worst fears and come out the other side, battered but unbroken. I thought of Brad, sitting in his prison cell, stripped of the wealth and status he'd valued above all else. I no longer felt anger or bitterness towards him. Instead, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. His betrayal had forced me to confront my own strength, to rebuild my life on my terms. In trying to destroy me, he'd inadvertently set me free. As David held the door open for me, I stepped out into the sunlight, ready to embrace whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I was excited to face it. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning.